Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank you all for joining us for tonight's event with Andy Biersack with co-author Ryan J. Downey discussing They Don't Need to Understand, Stories of Hope, Fear, Family, Life, and Never Giving In. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn more about them on our website by signing up for our email newsletter, as well as following us on social media at Book Soup and following our Crowdcast page right here. Our next event is this coming Friday with Maria Kuznetsova and Megan Cummins discussing Something Unbelievable and If the Body Allows It. And past events are also available on our YouTube channel. As I'm sure most of you have caught on by now, tonight's event will end with a Q&A. So I'll share this anyway for those who don't know. To submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. And if you see a question on the list that you'd like for our speakers to answer, you can click the like button and it'll bump it up in the queue. And we will try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Also, please consider supporting Book Soup and our authors tonight by purchasing a copy of tonight's featured book, which you can do by clicking the green button right below the viewer screen. They are signed copies, and when you click the button, it'll redirect you to our website where you can finish the checkout process. It will not interrupt the program, so you can do that at any time. If you are local in LA, we are also open for in-store browsing, so please stop by daily from 11 to 5. And with that said, I'll introduce our guest for this evening. Andy Biersack is the singer of Black Veil Brides and performs as a solo artist under the name Andy Black. He's acted in both film and television, conceived the graphic novel The Ghost of Ohio, and co-created the Andy Show podcast. Andy has appeared on the covers of tastemaker rock music publications like Kerrang, Alternative Press, Rock Sound, and Revolver, and shares content with millions of followers across social media. He was the host and head writer of the 2017 Journey's Alternative Press Music Awards. He lives in Southern California with his wife, singer Juliet Sims, and their 3 pets. Thank you for being with us tonight, Andy.
Thank you.
Other guests, Ryan J. Downey, worked as a writer, producer, reporter, host, and editor for a number of media brands, including MTV News, Billboard, The Hollywood Reporter, Marvel, IFC, Lionsgate, Hearst Media, and MSNBC. He is the founder of Superhero Artist Management, representing rock bands and producers, and Popcurse in Southern California. We're excited at Book Soup to have both of these guests, and without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to Andy and Ryan. Thank you all, and please sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Samantha.
Thank you. What an introduction it was.
Yeah, that was great.
And the other thing is that I believe, and this is just to peek behind the curtain, I believe that you wrote my introduction as well.
Once she started reading it, I realized that, and then I sat here thinking, wow, I hope Andy doesn't hate anything about what she's saying, because
no, it's fantastic and most certainly written by you about me. Because the nicest things that are said about me are always said by Ryan J. Downey. Hello, everybody. How are you doing? We've got the chat going. I actually don't know the format here. Are we just talking to each other about the process?
The chat is going. I think we're talking to each other about the book a little bit, and then I will look through the questions, which we have a lot of. And I normally I guess the way these go with Book Soup is it's more of a chat from the author or authors, and then a Q&A kind of towards the end. But I think because you have so many fans and friends here and a lot of questions, we should probably start the question process considerably earlier than they normally might. So
yeah, because I think we might be able to use the questions to talk about some of the book stuff depending on what's being asked.
Exactly.
So let's try to do that.
Yeah, I would say is a general note just to kick us off. For those of you who don't know, of course, everybody watching this knows Andy grew up in Ohio and moved to California when he was quite young. I also grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Indiana, and I've been in California for 20 years as of this year. And Book Soup, for a long time, I lived in the Los Angeles and Hollywood area. Book Soup was one of my favorite places to go. So when this came up that Book Soup was interested in hosting something about Andy's book, that in and of itself was like it's like one of those, probably how you felt, once upon a time going into a record store or a Best Buy or something and seeing.
Yeah, I mean, when we found out, you called me crying, and you were in hysterics,
and you swore never to talk about it. And
and I said, look, I won't tell anybody this, but now that you've spurred me on here, you were in serious tears. No, we are both very appreciative for the opportunity to do this. For us, we worked on this book over the course of many years, through touring and different experiences, and building this up through, kind of starting with one book in mind and then ending up with what we have now. And it was released during a global pandemic, which also made the release kind of weird. Traditionally there would have been a book tour or we would have gone out. I remember years ago us talking about how we had intended on doing something like this, but in a tour format where we tell stories and read from the book. And that was always part of the plan. We were going to try to go into like rock clubs and do a show like this when the book was released. Unfortunately, this book came out during a time that was not a possibility. But the good thing about it is, if there is a silver lining to all this, is that our book came out in a time where people could maybe just sit and read it or find out about it and listen to the audiobook or whatever it is. So doing stuff like this, where it's a virtual version of what we might have done otherwise, is still an opportunity to do it. So I want to say thank you to everybody who's in here. And I also, side note, want to say to Rain, who I see has commented, what happened to the lip piercing? I have not had a lip piercing since, I believe, the first 4 years of the Obama administration. So it has been long gone. And so you haven't, I guess you haven't been paying attention to my lips.
But that does count as the official first question. So
yes, you haven't been paying attention to my lips is the first answer to the first question in this Book Soup thing. So thank you again to Book Soup. And Downey, do you wanna get into it?
Yeah, I want to get into it. How about this? How about I ask Andy a few questions, and then we'll jump into everyone else's questions. I just talked about you as if you're not here, but
so wait, you're going to ask me your own question?
Yeah, I'll ask you one or two questions, and then we'll jump into those. I wanted to ask you, because I actually don't know the answer to this necessarily. What was the initial inspiration for doing a book like this? Because of course you did the Ghost of Ohio graphic novel. You've been involved in a lot of creative things outside of just playing and performing music. But how did the idea for this, because obviously it morphed and transformed over the process of it, how did this first come about? Did someone approach you and say, hey, have you ever thought of doing a book? Or, what was the initial spark for this?
I mean, it's kind of a two-part thing. One is people don't necessarily even know, but for most of the tours, from the time that, audiobooks on iTunes was a thing that you could have, I would bring my crappy old laptop with iTunes, and I had, on every tour, it was all of Penn Jillette's books, things like Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins and the Bible, Dead Sea Scrolls as audiobooks, and all these things I was constantly listening to, whether it was biography, all the members of Kiss's biographies in audiobook form, or historical books on audiobook, constantly on tour. And so the format of storytelling was kind of always in my head. I would sit in these hotel rooms and I'd be in, Germany somewhere, and my laptop would be on one side of the room, and I'd be folding my gross clothes on a day off, listening to Penn Jillette tell stories about what it was like to be a magician in 1978 in New York or whatever. It's things that didn't bear any consequence on my life, but were just sort of like, it was like having friends with me on tour outside of people who were physically there. And so I was always interested in like, well, what would I say if I did something like this? And it honestly started with that audiobook format, because it was always something that was so consciously there with me. We were doing, I believe we had just, I want to say that we hadn't even started Veil yet. It was kind of that gap between the Shadow Side and Veil, or towards the end of the Shadow Side solo record cycle. And we got hit up. I actually distinctly remember it. I was sitting on the 101 in traffic by the Rampart exit in downtown, which is very specific and something that really, it doesn't matter at all to this story, and won't matter to anyone who doesn't live in Southern California. But I remember specifically, I was still smoking cigarettes at the time too. So I had my window down, it's hot outside. I'm looking at the Rampart Boulevard exit, and I'm thinking about how one of my best friends, Patrick Fogarty, used to live over there, and he no longer does. And so I have those specific thoughts in my head. I get a call from Blasco, my manager, who says, there is a book company that is kind of interested in rock and musician-based IP, and they want to see if you'd like to do a book. And specifically because you're a Bengals fan, and it's interesting that you're a fan of like a small market team and there aren't a lot of Bengals fans, and would you want to write something about that?
Wow.
And,
yeah, I never knew this. I didn't know that part at all.
Yeah. And so I was like, well, I don't really know that that's a book. Like, I don't think that we could get a whole book out of that. But yes, I would, in principle, I'd want to do it. And so then we just kind of started thinking. And then the first step was, well, you're not a book writer and you've never written a book. So we're going to, and this is not to disparage the previous publishers, but ultimately they don't need to understand, did not come out on this publisher's company. But they immediately assigned me a ghostwriter and said, we're going to have somebody write the book. You're going to write the book through essentially dictation, and then somebody else is going to transcribe it or whatever. At least that's what I thought it was in principle. And so I started having these really long phone calls with this author for hours on end, describing what I kind of perceived to be what the story was. And the other thing about it is that I didn't really know what the book was going to be. So, and it wasn't the job of this ghostwriter to really direct me in any way. So I'm just calling for 7 hours at a time, speaking to this author about things I think are interesting and maybe aren't, but like here's a story or here's a thing. And then we do that for a couple months. And we're working on Veil, and I think, or I'm working on a record, and here's the first draft of this book, and it just wasn't. I read it right away, and I thought, this is not me. Like, this doesn't sound like me. It is clearly written by somebody else. It's not in my voice. It feels disingenuous in a way that it's not the author's fault at all. It's perfectly written. It's totally fine. It's not a bad story or a bad book. It just absolutely isn't me speaking. And it seems like a huge waste of time to release a book and not to be self-aggrandizing. I have a very specific tonality in the way that I speak and the things I say. And I felt pretty sure that everybody would know that pretty quickly if it wasn't me. And also I just wouldn't want to release something that didn't feel like it was coming from me. So then we had I had to do the thing that I've now had to do twice in my career, which is somebody that I'm working with or really respect. I have to go, I think we're not actually, I've told the story before. Originally, John Feldman was not producing, it's in the book, was originally not producing Wretched and Divine. I had to let go of Sean Bevan and not work with him on that record, who's a wonderful producer and an awesome person. Similarly, I had to go to this author and go, this is not how this book should be. And then it was just kind of back to the drawing board. And I think pretty much the next day, we were moving at the time. We were moving to a different place. And while I was carrying boxes, I called you and I was like, I think we should do this book. And maybe you can take it from there.
Yeah, and I was all over it. And, in my case, having been a, air quotes, professional journalist, writer for, 20 some odd years, doing some sort of a book was always on my wish list. And there were a couple of near misses over the years, but it never really lined up where it was the right project or the right thing. And one of the things Andy and I have in common is as he mentioned, the audiobooks that he likes to listen to. I'm a pretty voracious audiobook listener and book reader. And each of us really appreciate the genre or subgenre of rock bios. Like you mentioned, all the various Kiss books, and we've both read Billy Idol's book. And, I have a whole, it's funny. I vividly remember one of my first conversations with Blasco about this project. And he was sort of asking me like, have you read a lot of musician type books? And I was like, I have literally 2 shelves of my bookshelf.
I've read all
nothing
of them.
But, that's predominantly the vast majority of the books that I own. So that was exciting to me in and of itself. The problem is that much like anything in life, you can't really be known for something until you've done it, right? So there were some situations where maybe I was going to do a book with someone, and then somewhere in the chain, the publisher or somebody said, well, what other books has he done? And it was like, well, I've done, I've written TV and I've done this and I've done that. Yeah, but what books have you done? I haven't done any books. So this was a huge opportunity for me, from Andy as a friend and colleague, and however you want to describe it, to now going forward, I have done a book with someone. It is published. It exists. People are reading it. They're enjoying it. So that was great. And then the other thing was just Andy and I being close and literally communicating in some form on a daily basis. We're talking all the time anyway. We're both kind of workaholics. So how do we transform the talking that we're doing anyway into something productive? So it was really just a perfect convergence of our interests aligning and, where we were and what we wanted to do. And it was so important because everyone watching this, you're all so familiar with Andy from interviews and, on stage and, the podcast and all these various things that, his voice literally and figuratively better than most. So yeah, the idea that a book would come out well written or otherwise that doesn't sound like him would just be a huge disservice to all of Andy's fans.
And the
so,
stories,
I took that as
the stories had to be. Sorry, it's hard on Zoom.
No.
You always talk over other people. No, the stories had to be legitimate, and I think the secret dynamic that we have versus, again, not to disparage anybody else, but the thing is, as you said, we're friends. Getting together at, we would go to this one vegan restaurant like every other day and just sitting for hours and me telling you stories and me writing something in a text message and sending it to you, or writing something in the notes and sending it to you, you writing something, sending it to me, sending you ideas of like, here's this thing that I just randomly thought of, or my mom reminded me of this thing, or all that stuff. I mean, to this day, I'll text you on a random Wednesday some crazy story that I forgot I never told you, and we're like, oh, that should have been in the book. So it was the fact that we have the level of closeness as friends open it up to be able to really talk about all these specific things. And again, the objective of this book was to tell the story to this point, not the life story. The tonality of this is not meant to be a, now that I'm old and gray, here's the lessons I've learned. The kind of jumping off point for me was because I'm so familiar with the genre, the disappointment in the first 3 chapters of every rock bio is the life that they're talking about is so far in their rear view so often that their youth is essentially a footnote, and the things that built the progression into the person that we know or are familiar with or respect or care about or are a fan of, those things are almost inconsequential, or in fact are unrelatable because they were written. You're reading a book from someone who's 75 years old about their childhood, and there's not a single moment in there, if I'm 28 reading it at the time, that I relate to, because their life is so far away from the life that I have now. Whereas for me, when we started this book, I was 26, 27. All of my experiences, some people might be too young to experience MySpace or LiveJournal or those kind of things, but they are still on the cusp of cultural relevancy, or at least close enough that those things are experiences that didn't happen that long ago. So writing about them now and being able to talk about that part of my life now felt like it was important, because I could actually legitimately tell that story and lean into those early moments and not have it be, I was a kid for 15 minutes and here's the part of my life you actually care about. You know what I mean? Because moving forward, if I am 75 years old, I can maybe go back and re-examine all those things and write about the second half of my life in more detail.
Yeah, and I thought that was one of a number of things that attracted me to wanting to do that, was that whole take on it that Andy had, and as he said, also as a fan and someone who's very familiar with the genre, there's this kind of behind the music model where these rock stories become very familiar narratives, where it's like, here's the humble beginnings and here's the rise and here's the fall, and someone crashed a car and this happened, and and some folks set out to write these books to settle scores because someone upset them or crossed them at some point along the way, and they want to really get at them in a book. And us having read so many of those, both of us knew from the outset we didn't want this book to be any of that. A bunch of stories about how crazy everything was on tour one night or whatever. It's just, it's trite, and it really isn't reflective of who Andy is. And I think for me, when it creatively really started to come together is when we figured out that the story is really about someone who had a lot of self-awareness, a lot of purpose, and a really firm grasp on your identity and your values from a very young age. And through the process of achieving everything that you have, kind of got into a space where you had disconnected from that a little bit, only to then find your way all the way back around. And I felt like that was, obviously we have decades and decades of Andy creating and performing and doing things and having more stories to tell. But I thought that gave this a really definitive kind of beginning, middle, and end. Is, we start in this place with Andy as a kid. He has these dreams, he has these ideas, but he also has these values, and he also has his firm roots in his upbringing and his wonderful, awesome parents. And then kind of going through everything, getting to here to only then kind of come back around and sort of reassert those things that were always important to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, of all the stories you can tell, the story of the truth of how you find yourself on any level is one that, whether someone enjoys it or not is up to them, but it is one that is at the very least important to the individual, and therefore, I think, a legitimate story to tell. So for me, going through a life that is not dissimilar to many people's lives, growing up in a middle-class family, Ohio, Midwest, whatever it is, it was always important to talk about how I perceive what this career or what this life is to not be about being remarkable or untouchable or in some way sent from above to rock the world, as we say in the book. The truth of the matter is that the work that went in, and then also to describe the luck and crazy situations that are required for success on any level, that to me is the story. The thing that is missed so often, and again, I don't want to get into like we're going to bash other books, but I think the thing that is missed so often in the origin story of anybody who's on any level successful or whatever you want to call it, is that those ingredients are they're subject to the person themselves, as opposed to like a kind of archetypal, like there's the, as you said, there's the journey to becoming famous. Then you become famous. Then you become a known crazy ass and a drug addict. And here's all the shit you're going to talk about everybody else. And then you sobered up, and now everything's better, and you've got a good life. Like that's not the real story. And so there isn't a bunch of shit talk about other people. Not because I don't dislike other people, but because it isn't, to me, inherently part of the story that exists. I know and have met and have been around plenty of assholes, but they're not part of the story I'd like to tell. So, you know what I mean? Like they don't get a whole big thing. And I think that sometimes is often leaned into in these rock books, especially, is like, I'm going to exact my revenge on you through these words. And then you just get into, your story is no longer about you. It's about these other people that you dislike.
And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it just continues things that are better left resolved and ignored. So, okay, I think generally these are a lot of people talking and then about 20 minutes of questions. We just did 20 minutes of us talking, and I think we should do the rest of questions.
Cool.
So, we've got a bunch.
And by the way, for what it's worth, I may very well be, somebody else might see me as an asshole. It's just, the truth of the matter is, just to say one last thing on it, because I know people have talked about what was the choice to not have it be like a shitty like tell-all thing. It's just not how, as we said, that's not how I see my life or what's important. And I'm glad to know that a lot of people have said that they liked that about the book, because that was people, ultimately not Rare Bird or anything else, but along the way we were both encouraged. Add more, crazy stories. Yeah. Add more talking shit, and it's not part of the story.
Yeah, and to Andy's point, the book started with one publisher. There was an editor that we worked with there who had a lot of great advice and guidance, and that publisher ultimately went away. The company itself dissolved, And then we were sort of in limbo. We knew we were going to finish the book and do it regardless. And then Rare Bird came along and were gracious enough to work with us to get it out to you guys. But yeah, in that process, there were certainly some voices that would kind of come in and go, "What? Yeah, more of this, more of that, more of this," and it's kind of more the traditional stuff you would expect. And I want to say also, to emphasize something Andy pointed out, he used the phrase "tell-all." It's not a tell-all book in the sense that it's burning people or breaking anybody's confidence or any of that sort of stuff, but it is, in my opinion, very authentic and very honest and revelatory in the sense that Andy's turning inward. So it is a tell-all in the sense of what goes on inside this guy's head, and I think that is endlessly more fascinating than what his ideas and opinions are about what's going on with everybody around him. When you read a book in the first person, that's what I want to get away from it as a reader. Is not what does this person guess is happening with everyone around him, but what is happening in the interior life of this person.
Side note, if you hear my stomach making loud hangry noises, it is because I am in fact very hungry. It is now 6:26 on the West Coast here. We generally eat dinner at about 5. So my body is very mad. And you might hear Crow, one of our cats, screaming at me outside the door because he is confused as to why we're not all eating dinner right now. And
Crow's just screaming because he hears my voice and he wants to know why he hasn't seen me in a while.
It's true. Well, I got headphones on, but he can feel your presence.
Yes. He can sense me. We're spirit brothers, though.
But yeah, I just heard Crow going, ah!
Yeah, Andy didn't wait until he was 75 to do a book, and he also didn't wait until he was 75 to have a 75-year-old man's eating schedule.
It's true. For those asking why I don't let Crow in, they have never met Crow. He is I love him with all of my heart, but he is the great destructor of all things. He would come in and immediately knock everything off this desk just for fun. And so
he's a little rowdy. It's part of his charm. So this question has the most votes in the questions, and as a reminder, you guys can leave your questions in this little ask a question thing, and you can upvote the ones that you would really like to hear answered. The question is,
let's see if he's out there. I'm gonna put this down. I'll show everybody him, but he's not staying because he's gonna knock everything.
The question is actually, can we see Crow? So
yeah, hold 1 second.
There was a brief moment in time where Crow didn't like me, but we figured out that it was actually someone else's fault.
Okay.
Now we're friends.
Here we go, Crow. Here's Crow. Here he is.
Plus, Crow's named after my favorite movie.
There he is. I can't hear anything.
Look at that.
Oh, little buddy. Here.
He looked right in the camera.
Okay, buddy. That's it. That's your cameo. That's your cameo. Okay, that was Crow's cameo.
I don't know if you could tell this, but he looked directly at the camera. It was amazing, like as though he knew. Like,
he's a very good model. Like he does. He's a very good model. Anyway, all right. What's the question? Sorry.
What is something you didn't write about in your book that you would want people to know? That question
is something that we didn't write about in the book. Geez, I don't know. There was something we were talking about the other day that there was like such a good story. Oh no, there's a significant echo going on, Downey. Is that coming from your side?
I don't hear it.
Uh-oh. This
Crow, what did
drive
you
me
do?
Crazy. I can hear everything I say immediately.
What did Crow do?
Uh-oh. Oh, this is bad. This is not good. It's immediately echoing in my head. That's going to drive me crazy.
I got nothing on my side. You want me to put on headphones just in case it's me?
There we go. It's good right now. Okay, we're good. Anyway, so I would say off the top of my head, the thing that I would most like to be able to have talked about, but it just wasn't, the timing didn't really line up, is the last year of the band, or almost 2 years now, of Black Veil Brides, and kind of our rebirth and the course of making The Phantom Tomorrow, and when we made the Night EP, and all the things we've been working on. I mean, you've been kind of around for all this, just the kind of like just the revival of the energy in the band and the friendship and the fun that we're having together and the work that we're doing together. All that stuff is really significant to my life as it is now. And it would have been nice to be able to put that in there, but maybe that'll go in the next one.
Yeah, and that was something I was going to say too, is that in terms of things that weren't in this book, that's another great thing about the book not being some sort of definitive tale of your entire life, is that not only are there more stories to actually happen and occur and for you to experience, but there's plenty that didn't go in there that can still go somewhere else. So
yeah, absolutely.
I look forward to the Andy Biersack franchise. the trilogy and then the quadrilogy.
I'm gonna do like a Twilight style. Every book will have a similar cover, and then like a similar name.
And then when we say it's the last book, it'll be like, but it's part one of the last
part
book.
One of the final book.
Yes.
Of a 6-part final.
This question is from Lauren. It's also one of the top voted questions. Was there a specific topic in your book that you found to be exceptionally hard to write about?
Just some of the personal stuff, just the stuff I deal with, whether it's being honest about anxiety, or I have issues focusing on things, or sometimes people will tease about we talk a lot about like I talk over people, or I fidget a lot, and those kind of things. Being honest about those types of things in my life and how those are realistic things for me, and I've been trying to improve on them, obviously, but there are things that I deal with in my life, and being able to be honest about struggling with things, and also like giving kind of my perspective on how I deal with that kind of stuff, and how my life is as a person who, I'm not always the person in the room who's the most interested in being social, or I'm, all those other kind of things, just personal stuff. It wasn't necessarily hard so much as it was, we talked at length about how specifically I can get this stuff across, and be sharing something, but also not be seemingly insensitive of other people or whatever it is. So like really figuring out a way to discuss, the mental health stuff and the emotional stuff, and also talking about where I was at during that kind of 2014, 2015 period, especially when it was kind of the bottom of my existence, and feeling so hollow and like I wasn't myself, or that I wasn't functioning on a level that made any sense, and not writing well, not being what I would perceive to be as good of a person as I can be, whether that's on a personal level or just as a professional. So I would say all that stuff, it plays into it. But yeah, I would say that just opening up, as you've noted, Downey, was the thing that was very important, but also sometimes difficult to nail it.
And that segues nicely into the next highest voted question, which is from Nicole, which is, what is the best way you have found to deal with your anxiety?
Doing things. I sometimes will hear people say like, "Oh man, I'm struggling with this or that. I really just need to take time off." And to me, I understand that, but the impetus to me is totally different. To me, if I'm really struggling with something from an emotional perspective, or I'm in a dark place or in a really anxious place, finding something to focus my attention on that is like here, as opposed to here, it has always been extremely helpful, and that's why little things like painting or drawing or cleaning, whatever it is, just something to help silence all of the noise, and really find something to create. I would say that even an exercise like building the world of the Phantom Tomorrow is a helpful exercise to me, because I'm putting on like the virtual headset, the VR headset, and I'm building the world, not literally of course, but and then I'm walking around inside of it, and I'm seeing what's down every street and what this looks like. And if other things are bothering me, I can kind of almost escape into this thing that I'm making. And so that I always try to advocate for people, it doesn't necessarily have to be a creative endeavor, it doesn't have to be creating something, but if there is something that is a healthy way of making something that wasn't there before, or finding a way to occupy your time with something that you really enjoy, and letting yourself be fully immersed in that, it can help bring down the level of anxiety from the outside stimulus and create something that's very centered on something that is a positive thing for you.
So this, we mentioned earlier the great Amy and Chris Biersack. Rain has a question, which is, what do you think you would have done with your life and career had your parents not been so supportive of your ambition?
I don't know that that's a possible. I don't know that I can answer that because I've only ever known what this is. I certainly know people who are hugely successful who were not as fortunate as me to have the parental support. However, I would say that I couldn't possibly imagine my life without it because it's been such a big part of my life growing up. Our family dynamic is one that has always been this way. And whether that was me as a little kid struggling with different things or trying to find my way or whatever it is, our family dynamic has always remained this way. And so my closeness with them or their support of me is so inherently baked into who I am. It would be hard to detach that from my existence or how I ended up. I think that if you're someone who isn't lucky enough to have that, that's still certainly possible to find a support system outside of your traditional family. And I think that we see that a lot, particularly in, alternative people. A lot of times the home life is not as supportive. And so you find people outside of that can be that support system in that family structure. And I think that as long as the idea is to have some stabilization, to have some protection from the world outside, regardless of where that comes from, that is family. So for me, I was very lucky that it is that bubble of my home that we talk about in the book. But for others, it might be a home that they create.
Beautifully said. This is questions from Amy. How do you find energy to do all that you do? I always have desires for projects or even just certain events, but can never find motivation or energy to actually do them. So I cancel a lot, and I wish I didn't want to.
I mean, my favorite thing in the world is when someone cancels plans.
I was trying so hard not to immediately just talk about how much Andy and I both love canceling plans.
Yeah, we love it. Like, we talk about it like, oh yeah, somebody said they can't do it. All right. I mean, I remember there was years ago where Juliet and I, we were going out to some dinner or something, and it's like people that we really like, but we were like, man, wouldn't it be beautiful if they just called and said like they can't make it, and then we could just put on pajamas and not have to drive all the way downtown or whatever. And then like immediately they called and they're like, hey, would you guys be so mad if we canceled? And we're like, oh, that sucks.
How could you?
Yeah. But then immediately like we just started dancing around, so excited. We love pajamas and not having to go do anything. Yeah. So it's a little bit different though, because like we're both, when it comes to career stuff, and you're this way as well, Downey, where like when it's a career-based thing, you can't wait to do it, and you're there for it, and you're hyper-focused and you're doing it. When it's like a life thing that you're supposed to enjoy, I find myself not being able to do it.
So true. And there's a lot of things I'll put on my calendar that because they theoretically sound like great things in some distant future that I'd want to go to and do. And then the day arrives and I'm like, I thought I wanted to go to that.
Yeah. Well, you've canceled on me enough times and I've guilt tripped you enough times to know that, that there's certainly, I'm not even above the Downey cancellation.
Called out.
No, not called out. I would say to everybody watching, Downey lives like 100 miles away from my house. Like it's not close. And I will invite him to come watch football games. And my team is the Cincinnati Bengals, who plays on the East Coast time zone, which means that their games take place
like
at
9 a.m., 10 a.m.
Yeah, they take place at 10 a.m. On a Sunday. And he often comes, by the way, which is impressive enough. I certainly would not drive to his house at 10 a.m. For a football game because I am not as good of a friend as him. I, by the way, am not as good of a friend to all of my friends as they are to me. I'm very lucky in that way. But sometimes he doesn't come, and then I give him a lot of very guilt trippy gifts and
yeah. I was just gonna say, don't let Andy sell himself too short about what a friend he is, because recently he felt bad about something that he didn't have to feel bad about in the first place, and sent me a Freddy Krueger shirt where Freddy looks like it's an old No Limits Records gangster rap record, and this is I feel very seen because Andy knows that two things I love is 90s gangster rap, and Freddy Krueger.
I did know that, and so when I saw the shirt, I had to send it. So.
Indeed. None of which, of course, answers the original question, which was, how do you find the energy to do all of the things that you do?
Well, I mean, look, the real answer is I put a boulder on my back at the top of a mountain when I was 18 years old, which is dropping out of high school with no prospects for a job of any kind, and then saddling myself with the idea that I was going to be in the entertainment business. And now at 30, my job is to constantly make things that give me a job. You know what I mean? And so, there is a part of it that is certainly functionality of I must move forward because this is the life that I've made for myself and I must create things. But on a much larger and probably more realistic level, it's just the love of it. I love making stuff. And so if I get the opportunity to make something, then that is an opportunity that I'm going to take. If the opportunity is to come meet you for dinner at a place that their vegan menu is just a single salad and, mozzarella sticks or something, then I'm probably not going to go because I'm not that interested in it. And I am traditionally not the type of friend who shows up for that. Allow yourself to be okay with not going to things that you don't need to, and fight for yourself and the ability to go do things you should do.
So perfect. And I needed to hear that too. And also, if you are, those of you who are burdened by being friends with people like Andy and myself, know that we love you and we like the idea of spending time with you. It's just the whole getting yourself together and out the door and showing up there that's harder for us weirdos. This question is from Irene, who is in Finland, where it is 4 a.m. So I believe she might be asleep and might see this later.
Did you just do the math on that, or do you happen to know?
Oh, no, she tipped it off. I would love to pretend that I knew, but in fact, it might not even be 4 a.m. anymore.
I like to picture that behind your computer, you have one of those airport style every clock.
17 clocks. Yeah. So her first of two questions is, when it came to drawing the line, how difficult or easy was it to decide what things to leave out of the book? And were there any moments oh, this is too much, I can't put this in? Oh,
you mean through the course of writing it, what we weren't going to put in?
Yeah, was there stuff where it was oh, this is hard to put in, but I'm going to do it, or
not really. I don't think we went down many roads that we ended up losing. I think it was more just editing. So you tighten something up from well, is this detail totally necessary because it doesn't help the story move along? When you're working on a book, especially if you're trying to tell an honest story, you're not changing what happened. You're just going, well, does the fact that the car was red really matter for this? And so, it was more little fine tuning things. I don't know that we ever went down a path that we went, oh, no, we shouldn't do this, because we consciously knew what we were doing. You know what I mean? There was never a time where we're from the time we decided kind of tonally what we were going to make, the only thing that changed was the direction that we went with, how it was laid out, what the chronological order was, how those little vignette stories were treated, and how we built around them and how we had connective tissue to those things. It wasn't so much we went in a direction that we thought, oh, this is great, and then we read it back and go, oh, no, this is terrible, we can't say any of this. Because, again, as you noted, it's an honest story, so you're not really... when you're not fabricating something or trying to build a narrative, it's a lot easier to just kind of go with the truth of what the situation is.
Yeah, and I think we're both fans of economical writing, like you said, where if it's not important that the car was red, we'd rather not hear it. We'd rather get to the meat of it. And then there was some work in terms of connective tissue to make it feel like things flowed, into one another. But yeah, I don't remember any point in the process where it was you calling me 3 days later and saying, that thing we talked about, I don't want to use it. There was
because then I wouldn't have talked about it. You know what I mean? And so I like to think that I'm consciously aware of the things I'm saying, more so now probably than when I was 20 years old. But that is the benefit of being older and having a life experience.
Yeah, indeed. This question is from Angeli. She wants to know, how do we know this is Andy and not the Batman?
Oh, is this like a simulation question? How do we know this is really happening? How do I know I'm really me?
Yeah, that's philosophers have been trying to, theologians have been trying to solve this question.
Let's get Michael Keaton's face in here and find out. Hold on, because this is the Batman. So that's
But he could be visiting from a multiverse. You could be our universe's Batman.
True. Good news, by the way. They started Michael Keaton's first day of shooting was yesterday in England on as Batman. Apparently, he is really playing Batman at 70 years old. So
yeah. As for those of you who may not be aware, they are making an Ezra Miller Flash movie, which will introduce the multiverse into the DC film universe, and that means we're going to have a Batfleck and Michael Keaton Batman in the same movie,
in the same situation,
who are two Batmen that I greatly respect and admire. So I'm excited for the possibilities. So let's see. This isn't necessarily book related, but it is certainly Andy related. And I know that there isn't an answer for this, but Jared wants to know if we can expect future seasons of Paradise City.
I would think so. I mean, I know that that's the intention. Part of the thing about the show, and the same thing with American Satan, most people are fans of mine are used to me being intrinsically involved in the production and creation of my things. When it comes to Black Veil stuff or Andy Black stuff or the Andy Show or this book or whatever it is, these are, things that I'm designing or creating and then helping facilitate making them happen in some way, whether that's part of a group or whatever it is. And in those situations, I'm able to kind of dictate how things are going to go or how they should be put together or when they're done. Scheduling, my job is often to make sure that those things are happening, and I'm on calls for those things. I'm waking up and talking about scheduling for records and tours and all that kind of stuff with our people that work with us. When it comes to a TV show or a movie that I am cast in to be an actor in, I am not a part of that decision-making process. I am not the guy who's the leader who's deciding something or whatever it is. So because of that, it's a lot of fun to be in that position, because in every other facet of my life, I'm kind of used to having to have the wheels turning to make things happen. In this, I am a guy who gets called to come in, and then I learn my lines and I do what I can. So I can't say anything definitively. I will say that Ash is always very good to me when it comes to telling me about, timelines and when we might be doing this, also in terms of planning around touring and everything. He said to me that the intention, and I believe he said this publicly as well, that the intention is to do a season 2, but a lot of that is also dependent on extenuating circumstances, things like the success of season 1 and where it's going to end up in terms of network and all that stuff. I know that the hugely positive response to the show has been, I think, a really good thing towards season 2. It's been #1 everywhere on so many different platforms and in different countries, and people love the show. So I would absolutely love to do it. I would love to be asked to be Johnny Faust again. And if I had to say like definitively, I believe we will do a second season. But again, I'm not the one who calls the shots on it.
Yeah, and to be fair to everyone involved with Paradise City, this is, of course, the answer for just about any show on television. There's always a degree of uncertainty about whether or not another season will happen based on
and much more so when it's a show that was made entirely outside of the studio system and made completely independently. We are now trying to enter into that ballpark with these networks because the content exists. But prior to that, this was an independently produced thing, 100%. So whether that is going to happen for season 2 or whether this will be, in fact, part of or part of a network, whatever it is, that remains to be seen.
So this question's from Emily. What's your favorite memory that you put in the book? Favorite memory?
Favorite memory? I love talking about some of the stuff when I was a kid. Towards the end of the book, we talk about drawing Bugs Bunny in preschool. That's a funny, kind of random memory. Talking about being the Phantom of the Opera at school in 3rd grade when, we're doing the talent show, all that kind of stuff. It's fun to share those things because those are things that there'd be no other context to bring them up. You know what I mean? I do a lot of interviews. I sit in this room pretty much every day and talk to this camera and talk about something that I'm promoting or something that I'm working on or something that I'm a part of. And there's really not a context in which I'd bring up a lot of these childhood stories. And so it was nice to be able to really get into the truth of my life in a way that goes deep into I was obsessed with this Phantom of the Opera book, or I wanted to get people's attention, so I drew this silly picture, or all that kind of stuff. The only thing that we've ever come close to is years ago you did a cover story about me that was a really in-depth thing about the making of my life, and you interviewed David
oral
Roth
history,
and these other people we talked to, in the book. And so, but apart from that, it's never been a possibility to really go into that kind of stuff. So it was an opportunity to do that more than anything else.
Yeah, and I really loved delving into a lot of the things that you turned me on to about kind of the haunted history and Gothic elements and folklore of the place where you grew up. And that's, for me, as somebody who I feel that geography often in ways that are not so tangible or immediately apparent really shapes a person. And, when I think about Morrissey or Oasis, I can't think about them without thinking about Manchester. Or, when you think about the birth of heavy metal and Black Sabbath and, people working in factories in this like post-World War II, I feel like by no means are those things like the sum total of who someone becomes, but I do think that they're important. And I loved having an opportunity to really flesh out and kind of illustrate the richness of the place where you grew up, which isn't a place that's celebrated in popular culture. I mean, we all know a lot about New York and London and Los Angeles, but we don't hear so much about, underground tunnels and tuberculosis hospitals and cemeteries.
You so rarely hear about the spooky history of the west side of Cincinnati. And that's one thing our book put out there into the world is that story.
Let's see.
We're probably not going to get through all 51 of these questions.
Exactly what I was about to say. We probably won't get to everyone's question, and we apologize.
I believe they said this is about an hour, so we'll be wrapping up soon. But I want to say, just because we'll do a few more questions, but before we do that, I want to say thank you so much to everybody who has picked up the book. I know a lot of people have listened to the audiobook as well. We really appreciate it for it to succeed as it has, and for it to be, number one on Amazon bestsellers for a while and all that stuff. Like, it's just so cool. This is something that we worked on for years and worked on again and really got it to a place where we were both really proud of it. But to know that it's success is a hard metric. It's hard to tell what success is for something. But I think by any scale, you can say that this book was a success, and that's down to you guys for buying it, for talking about it, for being invested in this story, which is my life story. So there's nothing more personal than that. I've been putting out records, telling stories and pieces of my life since I was a teenager, but this is literally the story of my life in a way that is much more open and bare. And so to know that that's resonated with people is amazing. So thank you.
Absolutely. And we live in a culture and a time where we're constantly bombarded with people telling you to like and subscribe and share and so on. But I want to give a shout out to all of you who have been sharing Andy's book on your socials, because it's coming from like a really organic place of purity. Like, it doesn't feel like marketing. I'm just constantly seeing it. I love when you guys tag me in it. I love, every opportunity that I've had to read when someone writes even just a sentence or two about what the book means to them or how it affected them or something in there that they related to. It's so cool. And it brightens my day each and every time. So super appreciate that.
Yes, agreed. Downey, this is the last question, man. You got to pick wisely. I'll let you scroll for a minute. In the meantime, if you guys have not picked up the book yet, as it says on here, you can purchase a signed copy at the green button. And I believe, I'm almost certain that, I have a bunch in here that I'll be signing. So you can buy a signed copy and know that it's legit. If you haven't picked up the book, please do. Hopefully you enjoy it. Support Book Soup.
And you know what? There was a question for me from Leah, which we actually just answered, which was, what was my favorite thing, right? I mean, it's hard for me to pick a favorite, but I definitely enjoyed, Andy's texting me pictures of just weird stuff from Cincinnati and just learning about all of that and delving into it with him. That part was really fun for me. As just somebody who, Andy and I obviously share a lot of interests. So
about once a week, I will text Downey a crazy story he's never heard from my life with great detail and pictures and references.
It is literally a privilege. Okay, so a lot of pressure for this last question.
There is so much pressure. Everyone is counting on you to not ruin it.
Aaron wants to know if there's one thing in particular that you could go back and do over, whether it's something that you would like to re-experience or maybe change how it happened, what would it be?
I think there's a lot of things. I mean, on a small level, just personal behavior, and obviously I wish that I had never started drinking as heavily as I did, which we talk a lot about in the book, and what that turned me into as a person, and not being proud of who I was or how I was acting. That is certainly something that, I would redo. But on a larger scale, I would say the thing that I wish I could do again, and something that I've really tried to do consciously over the last year, especially, and prior to that, being in lockdown and being unable to do the job that I have done, which is to tour since I was a kid, has really helped me to evaluate how incredibly cool that opportunity is. And I think that because I had started touring when I was so young, and I was touring 9 or 10 months out of the year for my entire adolescence into adulthood, there was a certain apathy that was built into constantly being on the road and being away from home and never feeling like I had roots, and just constantly moving and in a different country every day, and exhausted and trying to drink through the exhaustion and everything. And so now where I'm at in my life, I would say that I wish that I could go back and re-experience the early days of, hey, we're opening for Motley Crue in a soccer stadium, or hey, we're doing this thing or that thing, or to be able to experience it now with the kind of bevy of life experience that I have versus then, and be able to really appreciate those moments. Those are the things that I kind of wish I could do. But I think the one great thing is I'm getting to do, obviously we can't play shows, but I'm getting to have some of that in that, we're a band that has been around for 11 plus years in the public consciousness. And we've had one top 20 song, in that time prior to this new record, which now in our 11th year of public consciousness, we've got a top 20 song on radio. We've got 2 songs in the top 20 on the Hard Rock Billboard charts. We've got all this excitement around this record. And it's because of the fans that I'm getting an opportunity to really experience and appreciate every level of this in the way that I wish I had when I was 20 years old. It just took me 10 years to get to the point where I really understand how incredibly fortunate I am. And I've always felt fortunate and appreciative, but to really get to be in this part of my life and go, wow, this is like, things are even bigger and better, and people are more excited about us even than they were 5-6 years ago. That's a real gift, and something that I'm very appreciative of. So yeah, I mean, I say that to say there are certainly things that I wish I would have appreciated more, but that has taught me the lesson of trying to really appreciate every day now.
Oh, perfect. And well, thank you everybody for all of the support of the book, for coming on here, hanging out with us. And I want to take this opportunity. I've done it before and we'll do it again, but to thank you, Andy, for trusting me with helping you to tell your stories. And one of the questions in here that we didn't get to is people want to know if you'll do another book at some point. I think it's safe to say, there's no kind of timetable or anything, but it's safe to say that this certainly is not the last book with your name on it.
No, we've already, there's no specifics, but we've already talked about an idea for another book that you and I might want to do. So there's, it's out there. I mean, look, if it takes as long as the first one took, it'll be a while before you read it. But I think the next one would be a little bit shorter, a little bit more life oriented, and kind of less of autobiographical and more, moments from life and how to experience them. I think that there's certainly another book coming from the 2 individuals you see sitting here, but we will see when. And right now, I'm just excited to hopefully get back to playing music, and there's a lot going on. So thank you again to everybody for being here tonight. Thank you to Book Soup, and this was a lot of fun.
And Samantha, yay, there she is.
Thank you. There she is. Thank you, Samantha.
Yes, I've been here the whole time. Thank you so much for such a great conversation and for joining us tonight. Andy, I hope you get food as soon as possible.
I will.
And thank you, everyone, for being such an engaging and respectful and just lively audience. It's been nice, because when it's virtual, it's nice to know people are actually engaging and paying attention.
Can I say one thing before we go? Because it's bothering me. I want to clarify. Crow has eaten. He's not crying about not eating.
He's crying that Andy hasn't.
He's crying that I'm not out there in a time, because normally he hangs out in our space while we're cooking, and he loves to get little bonks on the head while we're cooking. So he's mad about the schedule changing. He's not hungry out there. I want to make that very clear.
Thank you. I'm sure everyone was
Okay.
concerned, but he is concerned for you. That's just how it works.
Yes, he wants his attention.
Yes, he needs it. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. And for those wondering if they missed anything or had to leave, this is rewatchable. So, as soon as this is over and refreshes, you can check it again or send it to friends and everything. So thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your night.
Thanks very much.
Awesome.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.